Welcome along, Explorer. It's that time of the week when we get just a little bit bored. No stress, just we're a little bit done with life down here on planet Earth for just a short while. So we go on an adventure. We search out some brilliant secrets lurking around the solar system in a brand new Fun Kids Science Weekly. My name is Dan, thank you very much for being there. It's the only show that tours the galaxy and gets you back home exactly where you are right now in under 30 minutes. This week, we'll discover what's really going on in your arms, your legs, your limbs when you get pins and needles.
The pins and needles is actually our body's warning sign of saying, hey, wake up, something's not in the right position, you need to do something about this.
And our quest to find the greatest science in the history of the universe continues. This week, we're looking into the future and why it's all about artificial intelligence.
Generative AI is where you can ask the computer to do something in a certain style. So you could ask it to make a nursery rhyme, but give it a jazz backing. Or you could make it take somebody's picture and ask them, what would that person look like in 5 years' time? So we've really opened up the box about what the kind of questions that we can ask computing.
And for our Dangerous Dan this week, we are returning to the very bottom of the ocean. Let's get cracking. It's a brand new Fun Kids Science Weekly. We'll start with your science in the news. You remember the astronaut Suni Williams, one of the two astronauts stuck on the International Space Station. They've been there for around 7 months. You might recall, along with Butch Wilmore, she was due to return home after a week-long mission on the ISS last June, but their return has been delayed because of a technical issue. But the astronaut Suni went on a spacewalk last week to perform maintenance on the craft. She held patch light files on a telescope and she replaced a reflector device on the docking adapter. So they're all keeping busy up there, keeping safe, keeping up with work, and now they just need to wait around for another couple of months until hopefully her and Butch can return home. And frogs, lizards, snakes, spiders and other insect pests are being transported across the world on cut flowers and potted plants, and they have the potential to harm nature. That's according to scientists. They are hitchhiking. They've been called intruders. They've included a tree frog that emerged from roses at a florist's shop in Yorkshire, in the UK, and also snakes have been discovered in ornamental olive trees that have been shipped across mainland Europe. Now, these could also contain invasive pests which can cause severe damage to crops and food. So it's not just a little bit frightening that maybe there's a random frog in your flowers, but smaller pests which can devastate local crops because they aren't aware or prepared of the threat that these animals can contain. It's something almost alien to them. So experts say there needs to be better quality plants shipped across the world and tighter rules on them to stop this from happening. And our final story this week, a new way of DNA testing in ancient bones could change what we know and how we think of British history. Let's find out more with Professor Peter Heather from King's College London, who has been involved with the project. Peter, thank you for joining us. Let's start by, in a simple way, how has DNA testing on ancient bones been done before?
Well, it's very recent that you can do it at all. When I first started working on this in, say, 2008, it was not clear that you could get ancient DNA out of bones in North European conditions. Too wet, too cold. The first success was getting the material at all, and it was found that a little bone inside the ear is where it's preserved best. So that's what all the modern work starts from. Then the next success was getting complete genomes, so being able to read off the entire DNA profile of a human being who lived in the past. And what's going on now is the comparison of what you find with particular individuals with what went before and what went after. So it's about building up a broader picture of DNA profiles from human beings living earlier, living later, and looking at the particular ones that you find.
How much has this new discovery and this new way of doing things changed what we know of the timeline of the different people that came to this country and also where they came from?
It hasn't done it yet, but it has the capacity to do so. That's what's exciting about it. It's really a method at the moment rather than the final outcome. But what this method allows you to do is potentially identify who among the kind of remains you find from the period, say, of the Anglo-Saxon movement into Britain in the 5th century, who is an Anglo-Saxon, who's come from Northern Europe. So Anglo-Saxons came from sort of a mixture of Holland, Denmark, and what's now northwestern Germany. That's where those populations come from. And they were a recognizable gene pool before that period, which is different from the indigenous British gene pool that existed in Roman Britain. And then looking at the human remains from that period of Anglo-Saxon migration, which is 5th, 6th century AD, and getting some sense for the first time of the relative numbers of people coming from the old Anglo-Saxon territories on the continent and people who are descended from the indigenous Roman British population.
With the studies of this gene pool, so the genes being what makes us all who we are and almost how we look to a degree, how specific can we be when we're talking about people that were around thousands of years ago? Can we get quite fine into what they would have looked like, how tall they might have been, what hair colour they could have had?
Yes, you can do all of these exciting things if that's your interest, because these segments, the same segments are floating around in us. So you can start to, or many of them, so you can start to see what segments do what within human physicality. So what's dictating hair color, eye color, etc., etc. And you can start to get a sense of that. Indeed, yeah, absolutely.
You have said it's one of the most exciting things to work on in the whole of British history. Now, if I were to throw you forward, Peter, to discoveries that have not been made, what type of discovery could be more exciting than this, do you think, in how we look at people from the past? What could change even more of what we know?
I think to understand who the people were who first came to Britain would be really exciting. I mean, we know quite a lot about them in general terms, but basically all modern Europeans, or anyone of modern European descent, is a mixture of three ancient preceding populations. Hunter-gatherers who come to Europe after the end of the last ice age, so about 6,000 BC, a large body of Near Eastern farmers who come from Syria, Israel, etc., Turkey, about 2,000 years after that, and then a chunk of people who come from Ukraine, southwestern Russia, the western steppe region, about 2,000 years after that. And all Europeans are mixtures of those three, sometimes in different ratios, so a bit more of the hunter-gatherers in Basques and Welsh, for instance, but we've all got those three big roots within us. What's so exciting is thinking about how those ancient populations intermingled, which they clearly did, because we're all mixtures of them. They clearly interacted, they clearly intermingled, they had children together. That's why we are the mix that we are. And this method would offer you the opportunity, applied further back, then to start exploring those very ancient populations, as well as more recent ones like Anglo-Saxons. So, I mean, the beginnings are always, I think, in some ways, the most exciting thing. The very, very beginnings. It's very hard not to get wildly excited about that.
Well, it's been wildly exciting to find out more. Professor Peter Heather, thank you for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much to Peter for talking all about that brand new DNA test that could completely rewrite British history. But fantastic stuff from Peter there. Right, let's crack on with some of your questions then. If you have anything sciencey that you would like answered on the show, anything at all that maybe you've heard so far this year and you think there's no way that can be possibly true, are you talking nonsense again? There's no way that's real. Well, I tell you what, let me finally solve it once and for all. Let me spot the fact from the fiction, and I will do the digging and answer any science question that you've got. And I might even give a call to one of my favourite experts so they can sort it for you. First up this week is from Arthur, who wants to know, what is cryogenic freezing and is it possible? Thanks for sending this as a message to funkidslive.com, Arthur. Cryogenic freezing, it might be something that you've seen in movies or sci-fi telly shows. It's a bit like putting something in an ultra cold freezer. Way colder than the one you might have in your kitchen. It's so cold that it can freeze things like tiny cells or even big objects without letting them spoil, without letting them break down over time. So these things get so cold that they just freeze and they stay exactly as they are. Now, scientists use it to save things like seeds, animal cells, or even people's DNA for the future. Some people also freeze their pets or even themselves, maybe if they're ill or after they die, hoping that one day in the future there might be technology to bring them back. It's more of an idea than a practice, really. It does happen in some instances. But imagine someone is sick and there's no cure for their illness right now in 2025. The idea is that they would be frozen and then brought back to life years, hundreds, thousands of years into the future when there is a cure available. Because, in theory, the cells that make that person haven't broken down in time. So the person would be thawed out, like your mum or dad might thaw out a chicken, something like that. And then the person would be saved with a new cure. But it's just an idea. And there's also a bit of an ethical dilemma, a big question around this problem. If it were possible, just because you can, should you do it? Maybe people don't want to stay alive forever. And also, there would be billions and billions of people alive if everyone could be cured because they're being cryogenically frozen, and there would be no room on Earth to fit people in. So there's questions over whether we should do it, but it's a pretty amazing science discovery if it were possible, Arthur. Thank you very much for the question. You can also send in a voice note on the free Fun Kids app and at funkidslive.com. I'd love you to do this, and you can star on the podcast. Let's get one on. This is from Harvey. What do you have, Harvey?
Hello, my name's Harvey. I've got a question for the science lab. How do you get pins and needles?
Harvey, thank you so much for this question. Why do we get pins and needles? And is there a more brilliantly described sensation in your body? It's exactly what they feel like. Let's find out, shall we? Adam Taylor is Professor of Anatomy at Lancaster University and joins us. Adam, thank you for being there. So Harvey wants to know, why do we get pins and needles? First off, do you enjoy that sensation?
In very, very small amounts, it's quite a cool sensation. As you say, there's nothing else really like it, but having it for too long can be problematic, and it can become uncomfortable.
So I quite like it. It's I've often had it on my legs when I've been laying down, or my legs at a strange angle, and then I go to stand up and it's almost numb, and I've fallen over a few times. Anyway, why do we get pins and needles, Adam?
So beneath the skin, we've got lots of nerves that are sending messages to things, like you said, standing up, sending messages to our muscles, telling us to stand up and move around. And there are also nerves running the other way from our skin, telling us the temperature of things being hot or cold, or whether something's painful or sharp. And what happens is with pins and needles, as you say, if you sit in a position for a long period of time, or you fold your arms over and you might be laid on them on the floor watching TV, what happens is the nerves become squashed, usually at your joint, so maybe in your wrist or your elbow or your knee or your ankle, where they're passing usually over a joint, and they get compressed between the two bits of bone that make up those joints. And what happens to the nerves is those messages that we're sending out to the muscles and that are coming back from the skin get interrupted. By the folding of the nerve, it interrupts the nervous messengers that are being passed along those chains, but it can also interrupt the blood supply beyond the elbow or the knee, wherever's bent. And so our body, the pins and needles, is actually our body's warning sign of saying, hey, wake up, something's not in the right position, you need to do something about this. So it's kind of an early warning system that the nerves aren't being able to detect the messages that are being sent properly, or that the blood vessels are being compressed and there's not enough blood getting to where it needs to go, either to help the nerves function, or maybe to get to your feet or your hands and keep them doing the jobs that they need to do.
I always thought that it happened when we were moving again, though. So if I'm sleeping on my arm at a strange angle, it kind of goes numb. It's only when I move it again and the blood vessels are released and the nerves are let go that we really get that strange feeling. Why is it almost happening after the event?
So basically, you have to think of it a little bit like a kind of blockade or a dam almost. So you've got all these messages that are trying to get to where they need to be or come back from where the skin. And once you open up the joint and enable blood to flow properly and those messages to flow properly, the brain gets a huge delivery of information, and it takes a little bit of time for it to kind of figure out which messages it needs to respond to immediately, and which of those messages are just the kind of it's almost like you've turned it on and off at the plug again. The system's rebooting and it's trying to get up to speed on everything that's happening. So as soon as you open up again, all that information begins to flow back, and the brain is almost resetting itself to get back to what it's used to seeing from all those messages that are being transmitted along those nerve fibers in your arms or your legs, wherever it may be that's gone numb.
How much do we know about why, when the brain is trying to sort this out, where it's getting all this information, why it chooses to interpret that feeling as like a really pins and needly, almost tiny stabbing pain?
And that's one of those kind of unknowns. So it's in different people, it presents as different things. So as you say, that kind of tingly, stabby pain. For some people, it's complete numb. Your arm feels like the end of your arm feels like it weighs 3 times what it normally does. The way the brain interprets it like that is to do with how much of the nerve has been kind of restricted in its flow. So and how long that's happened for. So you can get issues. The longer you leave it, the more problematic can become. And so, some people, thankfully not really children, but some adults can fall asleep with their arms or their legs over the back of a chair or a stool, if they've had a good party one night and they find themselves nodding off to sleep, they can fall asleep over the chair, and it can do permanent damage to their nerves. Thankfully, children are much more responsible than some adults and don't have those issues. But it's the brain's way of trying to warn us that there's an issue and then trying to reset the system as quickly as possible so that we can go back to functioning normally.
You are a professor of anatomy, Adam. You're not a historian, but like pins and needles is such a wondrously descriptive phrase. Do we kind of know where it came from? Who was the first person to say that feels a bit like pins and needles? Write that down. Write that one down.
That's a really good question in terms of where it's come from. So it has an ancient origin in terms of where it originated from. If I remember rightly, I think it's the Greeks who actually coined this phrase, and the medical term for it is called paresthesia, which means abnormal feeling or abnormal sensation. I'm not sure if somebody how somebody or who was the first person to have pins and needles stuck into their feet or their hands and discovered that actually when you fall asleep on your arms and legs, that's the feeling that comes from it. But the origin of the pins and needles sensation certainly goes back to the ancient Greeks.
Always trust the Greeks. Adam Taylor, Professor of Anatomy at Lancaster University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Dan.
So next time you've been sat down for a little while and then you start to get that tingling numbness, you'll know it's just because your brain is being absolutely overwhelmed by signals and information and it doesn't quite know how to deal with it. If you've got a question that you want answered next week on this show, make sure you leave it as a voice note for me on the free Fun Kids app or at funkidslive.com. And let's get to this week's Dangerous Dan then, where we we search out some of the strangest, most unique, most odd, weird and often deadly things in the universe. For today's, we are headed back deep under the water for a very strange species of shark. Remember, I think it was last week, we spoke about the black swallower, didn't we? A very curious creature that floats in the murky depths of the ocean. While I was doing digging about that, and other things in the sea, I came across the megamouth. How amazing is that? It's its actual name. It lives about 150 metres below the sea surface. It was first discovered in 1976, so not even 50 years ago, when one was tangled in a ship's anchor around Hawaii. Before that, we had no real clue these existed. Barely 100 of them have ever been seen, so we don't know much about them, but what we do know is that it is highly unusual. It's quite a big shark, can grow to 5.5 metres, so long it's got a soft and flabby body, a round head, and guess what the megamouth shark has? What its distinctive feature is? It's got a mega mouth, something that billows wide to squeeze in as much food as it can. It's got a top lip that seems to grow. It reflects whatever bright light is around. Scientists think that maybe this is a lure for prey to come closer. It attracts them near, so it can open wide and then swallow. Their mouths can open to almost 1.5 meters wide, which is probably as wide as you are tall. They squeeze in as many small shrimp and jellyfish and plankton as they possibly can in there, and they kind of swim slowly, a bit like a hoover, just sucking up anything that's nearby. Inside that massive mega mouth, they've got 50 rows of teeth on the top, 75 rows on the bottom, sharp daggers to crunch through any prey floating around that gets inside. So because this is such an unusual beast, with such a distinctive quality, this megamouth, it's so much it's been named after it, that the megamouth shark needs to go onto our Dangerous Dan list. And in our Battle of the Sciences this week, we are looking at something that you use every day. What's really happening inside it? Why are they so smart? And how could it help us? And how could it help us tell the future? We're doing computer science with Dr. John R. Woodward from Loughborough University. John, thank you for joining us. You've got 1 minute to tell us why computer science is the best science of them all. That minute starts in 3, 2, 1, go!
Great. So there's lots of applications of computer science. Probably a good one to start with is robotics. You might have seen the Boston Robotics walking dog, and the Chinese have just released one where instead of paws, the robot's actually got wheels, so it's incredibly maneuverable. And we've all seen drones, which are basically flying robots. Computers are used in computer games and CGI in movies. Your mobile phone has got an amazing number of apps that tell you how well you're sleeping and your fitness, and all your social media is based on computer science. We've got driverless cars at the moment. You might have heard yesterday there was a person in America who got stuck in a driverless car that went around in circles. There's a few hiccups. The internet is, of course, an amazing revolution. We can talk to people in Australia in real time, which is just an amazing technological feat. We've also got the Internet of Things, so it's not just our laptops and our tablets that are connected, but also our fridges and freezers, our car, our smart glasses and our watches are all interconnected. And there's some amazing uses of AI at the moment, not just in games, but in some quite technical areas. For example, protein folding just won a Nobel Prize. And I'm sure you've heard of things like ChatGPT, which is getting very rich in the way we can interact with it, not just text, but now with images.
John, that's your minute done. But it was a
wow.
brilliant minute. You pitched us so many different things that we can unpack. So, here, like computer and science, it's this massive catch-all. You just told us so many different ways. Robotic dogs, mobile phones, self-driving cars. What is your mission when you go to work with computer science every day? What's the thing that you're focused on?
That's a good question. So I've got two parts to my job. One is research and one is teaching. So I believe everybody can understand computer science and learn to program a computer just like we can all read and write and do mathematics. So that's one of my missions. And my other mission is in research and using artificial intelligence. And the way I use artificial intelligence is to help it build better computer systems. So we might have something built by a human originally, but how can we actually make it even cleverer using AI?
Even AI has grown so much in the last few years. And yeah, if you're like me, you ask it silly questions online. I know it does smarter stuff. It helps understand what we want to listen to, maybe on our smart speaker. What are the opportunities in the next 10 or 20 years with AI? How much of our world could it be really instrumental in?
That's an excellent question. I think computers, as you said in your intro, touch every part of our lives. And I think AI will do the same in the next 5 years even. There'll be opportunities around medicine, education, defense. I can't think of a sector which won't be touched by it. So law, for example. We've got to be a bit careful at the same time, though, because AI is human-like and it can make mistakes. So it's not a catch-all for everything. It's not wonderful. There are going to be mistakes made.
Well, it feels like the future, really, computer science, because I've spoken to loads of different scientists across all different fields who are battling out to be first. Yeah, they'll all use computers. They will all figure out the science of those computers. And you've given us some examples of ways that it's been used. What are some of the more creative ways, John, that computer with science has been used over the last few years?
So I think one of the big, interesting breakthroughs recently is the way you can use what's called generative AI. So generative AI is where you can ask the computer to do something in a certain style. So you could ask it to make a nursery rhyme, but give it a jazz backing, or you could make it take somebody's picture and ask them, what would that person look like in 5 years' time if they live a healthy lifestyle, or in 5 years' time if they live a very bad lifestyle. So we've really opened up the box about what the kind of questions that we can ask computing. So there's lots of applications of that. And I think it's good to get children involved in this. We could ask the computer, for example, to make up new stories for children. So what would be an original story or an original piece of music? And we can also guide it in this process as well. So we can be hands-on or hands-off as how creative we want it to be.
And you've worked in the field for a little while. What's been the real moment? Because you've seen so many different types of computers and the science used in it. What's been the real moment where your mind has been blown? Like, this is actually possible?
So it was about 18 months ago when these large language models came out. And these are the things we've just been talking about, where you can type in something at the text prompt. And I think everybody's been amazed at how effective it is. It does make mistakes, and I can give you an example. But I think a lot of scientists before working on very narrow, very specialized areas where these large language models, which have been trained on pretty much the whole of the internet, have got this a vast amount of data available to them. So they can ask these quite complicated and difficult questions. I know you said you've asked it very sort of silly questions, but you could ask it some very sophisticated questions, and it does often come back with some very clever answers.
And I know that a lot of people listening will be using computers all the time. Probably the fact that you're listening to me now, you're doing that on some form of computer. Maybe you're learning programming at school, John. To take it further and to be a computer scientist when someone is older, what type of questions do they need to be asking? What do they need to be thinking about and learning?
That's a very good question. So computers are very push button. You push a button and something happens. So the question is, what's happening behind the scenes? So, for example, I can see your face now on this video camera, but the question is, how does your face get all the way across from wherever you're sitting now? Now, of course, it goes down the internet across the wires, but how is it that it's delivered in real time? If there is an error, if there's a mistake in the sound, it's quite recoverable. We can still hear each other quite well. And if you think about how does that happen, it's quite interesting. Or if you've got your mobile phone and you take a picture, you often see a little green box around somebody's face, so it recognizes where the face is in the picture. But try and think about how it does it. So just bring some curiosity. And maybe this is a common thing throughout all of your podcasts, is if you're curious about physics or chemistry, why do two chemicals explode? What happens when you fall into a black hole? So it's just about curiosity. So it's the why question.
And we always finish by throwing you into the future, John. So let me propel you forward 40, 50 years, whenever it is you're going to stop being a proper computer scientist. What's the one question that you would love to answer? What's the one thing that you really want to know in your field?
Wow. That's, I guess it would be how has computer science helped humanity? What's the real... We're all used to social media and how it's a nice thing to have, but how can computers really help us? What can they really do to enhance society and humanity, equality, and make the world a better place? That's the kind of question I'd like to be driving towards.
Well, it's one, I think, of all the Battle of the Sciences we've had, it's one that really has, touched on something that we use every day. So, Dr. John R. Woodward, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much to John for telling us all about AI and why it's the future and what we need to be thinking out. Do you think that makes it to the top of our Battle of the Sciences leaderboard? We'll have another expert trying to prove why their field should come first next week on the podcast. Let's catch up with Agent Planet, right? This is actually all about AI and using computer science and how that might help all parts of our lives in the future. Agent Planet is a brilliant series that we've made. It's all about town design. And this episode looks at how we live in a digital world with that digital technology is a big part of our future spaces. So our two heroes, Anna and Agent Planet, are having a think about what those spaces might look like.
Agent Planet. This is definitely the city of the future. Tablet charging ports on every street corner. Virtual reality parks for people to explore. Okay, it looks like a big empty space, but it will depend on what reality you're checking out. I think I'll call it Smart City.
Smart City. Oh, very modern.
You're going to love this, Agent Planet. Look, in Smart City, all the vehicles are self-driving. They run on GPS, so I can get rid of the roads. And road signs. And parking spaces. The autobubble cars can just take themselves home.
Well, you've certainly made a lot more space, but not sure that Smart City inhabitants are happy about your changes.
There's autobubbles everywhere. You can't walk along the streets without one buzzing in the way. Maybe I'd better put roads back in.
Or something like roads. It's worth keeping some design features if they still do the job. Great thinking, though. What other ideas have you come up with?
Well, in Smart City, there will be Wi-Fi everywhere for free. I figured that we use the internet for pretty much everything, finding somewhere to eat and drink, or to map a route.
That's sensible. You're thinking about how people use technology now, and you can see it's something we can expect to be around for a while.
And drones for delivery. Look, we all order stuff off the internet, so what better way to get those parcels around without more vehicles on the road?
Quite a lot of drones there. Kind of noisy, don't you think?
I guess, but check out how cool drones are.
Just because cool technology exists, it doesn't mean you have to include it. Just because it's, well, cool. It's important that any benefits aren't outweighed by harm. Look. After the Second World War, lots of towns and cities needed to be rebuilt. And with cheaper cars and more choice, everyone was very excited about owning a car. What a great way to get from A to B.
So they thought, let's make this place easy for cars to get around.
Yep, huge swathes of motorways and roads were built, connecting up the country. And to get onto the motorways, massive interchanges were constructed.
Wow, kind of insane, but impressive.
It was. But planners hadn't realised that this cool new technology had some not so cool side effects. The growing number of vehicles on the roads led to traffic jams, which meant that air pollution became an important factor. And those new roads were built over places where people already lived, harming those communities. To get across the roads, underpasses were built. But dark underpasses weren't always safe or pleasant places to be.
All right. Maybe I'll park my drones, but I was thinking it would be great if every house could have solar panels.
That's more like it. One of the smartest uses for new technology is when we're thinking about the energy that towns need. It's even possible for a town to use its own waste to produce energy. That's something that cities like Stockholm already use.
Cool. Well, I'm definitely keeping the virtual reality park.
Don't forget to have a few real parks and zoos too. You need real-life green spaces to support wildlife and also prevent flooding.
I'm guessing your virtual green space won't do the job.
Talking of prevention, looks like I'm needed to prevent another planning puzzler. Gotta go.
Thanks for the tips.
Agent Planet, created with support from the Royal Town Planning Institute. Find out more at funkidslive.com/agent.
That's Agent Planet. You can hear more of that series wherever you're listening to this. Just search for it. It's Google, Apple, Spotify. It's also on the free Fun Kids app and at funkidslive.com too. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you have anything sciencey that you would love answered next week, make sure you leave it as a voice note on the free Fun Kids app and at funkidslive.com. And Fun Kids is a children's radio station from the UK. Listen all over the country on our app, on our website, and if you've got a smart speaker, wake it up and ask it to play Fun Kids.